Okay, looks like everyone's in. So welcome everyone to this edition of Paleoperks, and we're really excited to have Rick Tolchard from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa this week. And Rick's talk will be about the Triassic of Southern Africa, life and rebirth from mass extinction to mass extinction. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge funding from the Linnean Society for financially supporting this talk. And a bit about the format of today's seminar, if you haven't been to a Paleoperk seminar before, or if it's your first time back after a little while. So we have a few welcome and announcements for just under 5 minutes, followed by Rick's talk, a moderated Q&A for about 10 minutes, and then an after talk tea time with our speaker. So Rick's very kindly agreed to stay around for tea time, and we very much encourage you to stay for this. So don't forget to send your questions via the chat to the questions@Paleoperks host, who today is Pedro. So a bit of housekeeping. So Paleoperks values the participation of all folks interested in paleosciences. Please remember to abide by a code of conduct during today's seminar. If you somehow found yourself here without having signed this, please take a moment to go to our website and review this and sign it. Please also remember to mute yourself for the duration of the talk. You shouldn't be able to unmute yourself, but if you find that you can, please remember to not unmute yourself so that we can create a nice quiet environment for our speaker. You can also ask questions again by chatting to the questions@Paleoperks host, or by using the raise hand function. So we'll allow you to unmute yourself and you'll be able to ask a question by voice. Any technical issues should also go to the questions host. We have closed captions built into our Zoom, and you can use the CC button at the bottom of your screen to show or hide them. If you hide them for you, this won't hide them for everyone else. You can also nominate all of your amazing and outstanding early career friends and colleagues for Paleoperks to do a seminar. The link will be in the chat very shortly. And we'll also have our weekly feedback form for demographic information. This is anonymous, optional, but very much encouraged, and you can find it in the chat window. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Rick Tolchard. Rick did his bachelor's at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, followed by a master's in paleontology, also at the University of Witwatersrand, followed by joining the Evolutionary Studies Institute for PhD. So he's currently a PhD candidate in paleontology, recently submitted his thesis, congratulations, and is awaiting examination. And now I'll pass over to Rick for his talk.
Thank you very much. I just want to actually put this into. Okay. I just want to say thank you very much to the Paleoperks committee for having me here today, and thank you to everyone who's joining. So today I'm going to be talking about the Triassic of Southern Africa. And I'm going to start by orienting everybody with this map here. South Africa and Lesotho are covered by a very large sedimentary basin called the Karoo Sedimentary Basin. It spans a very long time frame from about 310 million years ago here in the Dwika and Eka groups to a far more, in geological terms, recent 180 million year old Drakensberg group over here. This map will come up a lot. It'll be helping us to orient where we are. We'll be looking today at things in between the Lystrosaurus zone, which is this sort of light shade of blue-green, right up to the Scalenodontoides zone. That's this orange here. So the stuff we're talking about will be happening in that geographical space. First off, just a little bit about myself. I am a PhD candidate who's just submitted and waiting examination at the Evolutionary Studies Institute. That's my building from the outside. I have worked throughout my postgraduate career under the tutelage of Professor Jonah Chouanier. And for my PhD, I have also been co-supervised by Professor Roger Benson. My PhD focuses on phylogenetic comparative methods and macroevolution, specifically relating to the evolution of diet in tetrapods. This is a diagram from Buren et al. 2016 showing the kind of stuff I did my PhD on. That's not what I'm going to be talking about today. My honors and master's research focused on vertebrate paleontology from the Triassic period of Southern Africa. So first off, what is the Triassic period for those who are unfamiliar? It is between 250 and 200 million years ago. This is from the most recent geological timescale. I'm sure many of us are familiar with this diagram. And it includes a lower, middle, and upper part. And the biggest, the most famous event that we see throughout the Triassic is the rise of dinosaurs. By the end of the Triassic, dinosaurs become the dominant land animals. But for the duration of the Triassic, we're still seeing a more ancient kind of ecosystem dominated by your synapsids, that's your proto-mammals, as written in this diagram, and non-dinosaurian archosaurs. So today we're going to take a journey through that process by looking at the southwestern Gondwanan and more specifically the Southern African Triassic fossil record. So why is the Triassic period interesting? Well, for a start, it is the origins of many major amniote lineages alive today, such as birds, crocodiles, turtles, and of course mammals, have their roots in the Triassic period. You'll see here the archosauromorph tree. Archosauromorphs, for those who are unfamiliar with the term, include modern-day birds, modern-day crocodiles, and all their extinct relatives, including your non-avian dinosaurs and several other critters that we will get to throughout the course of this talk, like Rawasuchians. Aegisaurs are another example. And yes, mammals also diverge from their ancient ancestors during this time frame. And the process of this happening is very interesting from an evolutionary perspective. For one, life does a lot of experimentation throughout this time. As I'm sure you can see here, we have some interesting body plans that evolved. This guy here is called Longisquama, a small arboreal reptile. This is a trypanosaur, a cross between a reptile and a sloth that has a weird hook on its tail and on its arms. It's a arboreal herbivore. Then there's these odd aquatic forms like Tanystropheus here with a neck several times longer than its body. And this Alicotosaurid developed a body plan that wouldn't be common of modern tetrapods. We have other little guys like Rhynchosaur here and Van Clevier here. So basically we have a lot of trial and error of life during this period. Now, why would that be? Well, the answer to that question is that the Triassic period is in the middle of two mass extinction events. There are 5 mass extinction events throughout the Earth's history, and by far the most devastating was the end Permian mass extinction event. During this time, over 90% of marine taxa, 96% by some estimates, go extinct, and over 70% of terrestrial taxa too. It was a near extinction of life as we know it on this planet. 50 million years later, at the end of the Triassic, we have the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. We'll refer to it as the TJ for convenience sake. And terrestrially and aquatically, we have an extinction of around 70% of all taxa. Now, in terms of terrestrial vertebrate ecosystems, the TJ is more of a faunal turnover, where we see older lineages going extinct and specifically dinosaur and bird-lion archosaurs radiating into their niches. Now, the Karoo Sedimentary Basin of South Africa is really interesting because we have a good record of both. We have Permo-Triassic boundary and the fossil record over there, and the late Triassic, early Jurassic. So we can take a look at both of these events as well as some of the stuff in between. So we're seeing how the life evolved throughout the Triassic, including the ancestors of, as I was saying, many modern day amniotes. So it's a very good starting point, the Triassic, to study, I believe, modern ecosystems as well. So I'm going to start talking about the early Triassic. Here's our map again. So we're talking about things in this little layer here. That's our Lystrosaurus. That's this, yeah, lime green color, if you want to call it that. So in the end Permian mass extinction, which again we see the Lystrosaurus AZ, I'm going to say AZ from now on, again for convenience sake, we have a global hothouse climate, so extremely high temperatures, extremely arid, and a lot of life throughout the Permian just can't handle it and goes extinct. Now, what we see in the Lystrosaurus zone is something called the Lilliput effect. So basically what this means is that there is a selective pressure towards smaller body size. Smaller body size in the scenario is advantageous because it requires fewer resources. Smaller body size overheats less. It's not as, what am I trying to say? It's larger animals overheat easier than smaller animals, so there is an advantage to small body size. And we therefore see lineages shrinking. Well, shrinking is the wrong word. We see a selective pressure towards smaller members of certain taxa. One of those taxa is Lystrosaurus. So I'm going to be focusing, when I describe these fauna, on two main lines. The therapsid, or more broadly synapsid fauna, those are the ancestors of mammals, and our more distant cousins like anomodonts. And then on the archosauromorph, that's the bird and crocodile line, we'll get to that later. So in the early Triassic in Southern Africa, we find a overwhelming abundance of Lystrosaurus. That's these little guys here. So there were, I think there's 4 valid species of Lystrosaurus, and the larger forms went extinct at the end of the Permian. We find a very high abundance here and in other Gondwana deposits, including in South America, in Antarctica, in Australia, I believe also in India, where there is just a very high abundance of these little guys. Lystrosaurus, they are also characterized by fast reproductive rates, fast growth rates. So it's basically a survive at all costs model. Eutheriodontia, which includes the ancestor to mammals, is still mostly dominated by thericophalians like Tetracynodon. I'll talk a bit more about them later. They are a group of synapsids that was important in vertebrate ecosystems during the Permian period. Cynodonts, which include mammals are cynodonts, are also popping up. They're mainly small carnivorous, probably perhaps insectivorous or scavengers, something like that. Thrinaxodon is an example. I don't know if there is a Thrinaxodon in this picture. Let me just take a look. I don't know about that little fellow over there. But yeah, very small, very nondescript cynodonts. Now, the evolution of mammalia is a very important research question during the Triassic. We're looking at all the things that make mammals mammals. This picture from Norton et al. Shows us just that. We're looking at endothermy, the evolution of hair, the evolution of lactation, and Luke over here, he is one of my colleagues in my same building. He has been working on tooth replacement patterns in in cynodonts around the Permo-Triassic boundary. A lot of his work focuses on this kind of stuff, figuring out what a mammal is. So in the early Triassic, we're already seeing important data to answer that question. But like I said, cynodonts, the lineage that would later include mammals, isn't very widespread or very diverse at this stage. So in terms of the archosauriform or archosauromorph, to use more broad taxonomy, fauna in the early Triassic, it's still globally, there's not that many of them. It's not very diverse. In the Permian, there were only 1 or 2 taxa. Phylogenetic bracketing suggests that many archosauromorph lineages should have their origins in the late Permian and early Triassic, but currently the known fossil record is just not very populated with archosauriform and archosauromorph taxa. Proterosuchus is a very good representation of the archosauromorph body plans we get at this time. If you look here, it fills a similar niche to a crocodile, likely semi-aquatic, predatory, for its time relatively large, carnivorous, likely fed on prey smaller than itself, such as Allosaurus. So yeah, that's the kind of taxa we're seeing right at the end. It's basically leftovers from the Permian and a glimpse of what's to come. Now, one very important early Triassic site in Southern Africa that I think warrants specific attention is Driefontein 11. It's located over there. Here's a picture of it. Here's it mapped out in the stratigraphy. It's near a small town called Senekal. I actually had the good fortune of being able to visit it in the year 2020 for fieldwork. Now, this is a Logostatan site. It's also a lag deposit. There are loads and loads and loads of small fossils, largely like microfossil sized, and fragmentary parts from larger animals. We're talking fish, we're talking amphibians, we're talking archosauromorphs, we're talking cynodonts, and a lot of the material has not been adequately described, identified, and published. Now, I'm going to be doing a postdoc at the same institution starting this year, and my research will be looking at several of the archosauromorph specimens we're finding from Driefontein. Preliminarily, I believe that several new, or not new lineages, but new data points, new origins of lineages in this early Triassic deposit will likely be included. These include Allocartosaurs, Talistropheids, that long-necked thing from earlier, and potentially some dinosaur and crocodile archosaur propers. So that's just to give you a little advertisement of some of the research that's to come. Some interesting research that has already come out of Driefontein has been done by my colleague Chandelier. That's a picture of her there. She's also in the room behind me. Is on coprolites. For those who are unaware, coprolites are fossilized feces. And we have a collection largely from Driefontein of over 30,000 coprolites. And now these are very important because we can gather important information about paleoecology, what ecosystems look like, trophic levels, as well as the paleobiology of the perpetrators, as we like to call them, of the coprolites. So what Chandelier's been doing is scanning coprolites and segmenting out the inclusions. So we're finding feeding behaviors, diets, and several other interesting data points that will help paint a picture of our ecosystem right after the Permian mass extinction event. So the when I put it into display mode, it must have cut off part of my title. The Middle Triassic, not the Middle Trias, is also represented in Southern Africa, in both South Africa through the Sinaignathes assemblage zone, and in Namibia in Karoo aged rocks. That's these ones here, Namibia is geologically a very interesting country, by the way. There's stuff from Ediacaran right through to recent, like in South Africa, a very paleontologically rich country. And we're going to be looking at this little deposit here, the Omengondi Formation. So because of the severity of the end Permian mass extinction event, we are seeing the recovery from that extinction event in the middle rather than the early. Again, this is based on the current fossil record. I believe that a lot of the lineages were diverging in the early Triassic. It's just currently the fossil record is more sparse. However, we're seeing a more complete Triassic ecosystem come together here. The climate is still arid, but less so than it was in the past. And we're seeing a radiation of cynodonts, that's our mammal line therapsids, and archosaurus. These are becoming more diverse, filling up more niches, and generally becoming a bigger players in our terrestrial ecosystems. So the therapsid fauna we get in Southern Africa includes some late surviving therocephalians like Microgomphodon. Again, I'll talk a bit more about them later. And we have two main lineages of cynodonts, so that's Cynognathia. They are like this guy, Cynognathus. They include carnivores of relatively large size, as well as omnivores and herbivores, some of which are very small. One of which, that I described and we'll be describing later, grows very large. Then Probainignathia, which is the ancestral group that includes mammals. That's the group we're in. We are Probainignathians as mammals. So we're starting to see more of these things crop up in the Middle Triassic. Now, Canomaerids are large anomodonts. This Drosaurus was also an anomodont. So seeing Canomaerids growing large, we're seeing this lineage make a bit of a comeback into the large herbivore niche. So just to highlight a few interesting things being worked on relating to therapsids in the Middle Triassic. Brendan Stewart, one of my colleagues, works on therocephalians. These are largely a Permian group that, as I said, extended into the Triassic. He is currently working on this beautiful specimen of Microgomphodon, a very late occurring therocephalian. And yeah, we find a very good record of these in Southern Africa. And as you can see, they are trying to be mammals. They fill niches that mammals today fill. These reconstructions even place them as having hair. The jury is still out on that, but part of Brendan's work is to understand their systematics, their taxonomy, their paleobiology, and placing them in the overall picture of mammalian evolution. Also working on mid-Triassic mammals, we have Aaron. Just a quick note, I am throwing the odd shout out to several of my colleagues as, we're all working on the Triassic, many of us, and it's just important to show what direction research is going, in my opinion, the kinds of questions we're trying to answer. So Erin segmented Cystocynodon, that's a small and, according to her findings, fossorial cynodont from the mid-Triassic. So yeah, we're seeing a wide range in ecology and in body size, which brings us to my next little shout out to my own work, impidens. So impidens, the etymology of that name is literally warrior tooth. An impi is a kind of warrior in the Zulu people of South Africa's history, and dens, Greek for tooth. So that's how it got its name. So this is a Gomphodont cynodont. It is a Cynognathian, not ancestral to mammals. I love this reconstruction, by the way. I found it on Pinterest of all places by Hodgie Raptor. That's who it's credited to. I'm not familiar with this person, but I'm very impressed with their reconstruction of this taxon that I named back in 2021 and based on my honors research in 2017. It is potentially the largest non-mammalian cynodont. There is another contender, Sceliodontoides, which comes later, but very big animal, probably about the size of a bear, and it's a Triracodontidae group where the average member is about the size of a cat. So that is very impressive. Another piece of significance to this find is that it connects us to the Fremont Formation in Antarctica. We found impedens remains from both South Africa and Antarctica. So we're seeing in the high latitudes that this large bear-like animal, it was likely an omnivore, was thriving and coexisting with large predatory archosauriforms, which is what I'm going to get to now. That's our archosauromorph taxon. So we are seeing, as I said, a radiation of archosauromorphs at this stage. These here are Gardenia, which we have in Southern Africa. They're originally from Russian strata, and we have the relatives of Witwatersrand originate from here. As you can see, very large proto-lion type animals, if you want to call them that. This is a very good reconstruction of them. And we're seeing, aside from our Witwatersrands, rhynchosaurs, those are small to medium herbivorous forms, euparkerias, small semi-lizard-like things that would later lead to the divergence of Archosauria, which is our extant clade. And in terms of archosaurs, we have, as I said, the Pseudotsuchian line. That's our lineage that includes modern crocodilians. And at this time, globally, they are, for search of a better word, the most important players. They are filling up many niches that were extinct at the end of the Permian. We're going to talk a bit more about that later. And a lot of large predators are in the Pseudotsuchian line, as well as in the Witwatersrand line. The earliest bird and dinosaur line archosaurs, or bird/dinosaur line archosaurs, are still very small-bodied and not very diverse, though we are seeing their beginning in other fauna, like in Argentina, but not so much here in Southern Africa. So this brings me to another taxon I described, paper that came out in 2021, which is Echosuchus from Namibia, from the Armangoti Formation. It was a Rawasuchian archosaur. Rawasuchian is placed in apostrophes as it is a paraphyletic group. It includes paracrocodilomorphs, which are derived Pseudotsuchians and include modern crocodilia. However, it does not include crocodilomorph proper. Now, during the Triassic, as you can see, they had Pseudotsuchians in general and Rawasuchians in particular evolved into very many weird and wonderful niches. We have sailed back herbivores and sailed back carnivores. We have small edentulous predators and small edentulous herbivores. This Atasaur, which is a Pseudotsuchian but not a Rawasuchian, is an armored herbivore, not dissimilar to ankylosaurs of the Cretaceous. Echosuchus, however, is a lot like this guy here, a large terrestrial predator. So we're seeing, as archosauromorphs are coming to dominate the large vertebrate taxa space, it is our Pseudotsuchians that are the main players at this stage in the Middle Triassic. Now, the Armangoti Formation is likely a little older than the Sinignathus AZ in South Africa, and therefore has a more typical Middle Triassic fauna, where we have our Rawasuchian predator, we have Canamaerid large herbivores, and then more derived Synagnathian and Probaingnathian cynodonts forming the smaller bodied niches. So this is where we're getting to in Southern Africa. Now, between the early middle, which is what I was describing, that's including the Ladinian and Anisian stages, and the later middle, that's the later Norid-Amrician, globally a lot of interesting things are happening. In South Africa, unfortunately, we have a gap in the fossil record there, so I'll not be talking too much about that time frame. Now, the late Triassic, which is now we're heading into the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event. So now we've had our recovery. Now we're heading into round 2 of mass extinctions. As I said, the TJ boundary is more of a faunal turnover. We're once again getting a aridification scenario, though it seems that none of the paleoclimates that we have much data for in Southern Africa were ever particularly humid or particularly well endowed with rain. However, we are seeing here a situation where many Pseudotsuchian archosaurs are going extinct and dinosaurs are radiating to fill their niches. So our herbivores, the edentulous and the armored herbivores are going extinct. Dinosaurs will take up these lineages in the Jurassic. In terms of predators, the larger and medium predators are taken up by theropod dinosaurs. And the large sort of standard order herbivore that Canomaerids and some Pseudotsuchians once filled that niche is going to sauropodomorph dinosaurs. So we're going to talk about those in a minute. Now, sauropodomorphs, your iconic long-necked dinosaurs, in the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods evolved into the largest terrestrial animals yet known to science. I think the largest was a Cretaceous form from Argentina, Patagotitan, or Argentinosaurus. I think they're both contenders for the top role. And body size estimates have them at around 70 tons. We have nothing like that in the late Triassic. At this point in time, sauropodomorphs, rather than just being large, long-necked animals, there's a diversity in body plans. Some of them are bipedal, some of them are quadrupedal, and their body size can range from a few hundred kilograms, which for this lineage is relatively small, up to a respectable 7 tons. During the run-up to the Jurassic extinction event, which isn't as sudden as the Permian mass extinction, we don't see a sudden global heating effect. We have a repetition, if you will, of the Lilliput effect. We're starting to see the smaller, more gracile forms are the ones that are surviving. Here from Fernandez and Wernberg 2022, we are seeing there's a very good representation of the size and shape distribution of these guys throughout the late Triassic. Working on some of those specimens, we're finding a whole lot of new sauropodomorphs. So another shout out is to a colleague of mine, Atashni. She is trying to untangle the sauropodomorph taxa, name a few new ones, work out the systematics in paleobiology. There she is. She is exactly 1.5 meters, and aside from a brilliant scientist, doubles up as a scale bar. She insisted that I use that picture. I do find it quite amusing. So aside from sauropodomorphs, what else do we get in the late Triassic of Southern Africa? Well, this picture was done by a close friend and colleague of mine. We did our masters together. Here we have two large Rawasuchians, a Poposauroid and a non-crocodilomorph Loricottan. You need to remember those words. They're just groups that by the late Triassic were going extinct. In South Africa, however, we find, I described these specimens for my masters in 2019, several somewhat fragmentary specimens representing a minimum of 2 taxa of Rawasuchians that were present pretty late into the Triassic. So we're seeing that while globally they had largely gone extinct by this time, here in South Africa we have some of their late survivors. This picture here also shows one of the latest surviving Canomaerids, Pentosaurus, and Scalenodontoides, which is a confidant cynodont on the Cynignathian line. It is therefore not part of the group ancestral to mammals. And I like how this picture was drawn. It has some sauropodomorphs in the background foreshadowing the rise of dinosaurs. So the late Triassic fauna we get here in South Africa very much shows this turnover happening, where we're seeing the last of the dying breeds of the Triassic and the taxa that will come to dominate in the Jurassic, which is large dinosaurs and small direct mammal line cynodonts. So a site I want to talk about here, this picture is taken from a presentation by one of my colleagues, Kimberly Chappell, is a site called Kameka. I certainly butchered the name of that site, but it is a late Triassic deposit in South Africa that has yielded in recent years several very interesting new specimens. They include new sauropodomorph taxa, some new crocodilomorph taxa, as well as some other non-crocodilomorph pseudoseuchians. All of these are currently in the process of being described and worked on by myself and colleagues. And we're seeing basically the in-Triassic faunal assemblage, and in a very fossil-rich site. We've had a number of very good field seasons, and a lot of very good researchers have made their way out to work on this material. So yeah, I just want to draw attention to the site. It's I think a very iconic late Triassic site in Southern Africa. So to conclude my talk, the Triassic globally is important because we're seeing the ancestors of many modern amniotes. And in the context of South Africa, we have several specimens of these ancestral forms. We also have some of the largest of them. We have, I think, the largest sauropodomorph for its time. I think I may stand to be corrected on that. We certainly have a very large Rawasuchian that is currently in prep. We have very large cynodonts like impedens, like Sclenodontoides. That could have something to do with the high latitude, the high paleolatitude rather, of Southern Africa. We also have a very good snapshot of what an extinction event looks like. In fact, we have two examples. We have a reset, that's what we have at the end Permian, and a turnover, that's what we have at the TJ. And we see things like the Lilliput effect, and we then see the evolution of ecosystems from one dominated by non-cynodontian synapsids to one dominated by dinosaur line archosauromorphs. Here, of course, I'm talking in terms of large vertebrates. An ecosystem includes many layers, so perhaps dominance is the wrong word. And in South Africa and in Namibia and in Lesotho, the fossil record is very rich in this time frame. A lot of specimens still need to be described. A lot of new data points need to be worked out, and there is a lot of work to do on things like paleoecology, paleobiology, factors such as body size distribution, locomotory distribution, diet, trophic levels. There are several open and unanswered questions to work on in terms of piecing together this very special time in evolutionary history and understanding how the ancestors of today's major lineages cut their teeth in the evolutionary battle, if you want to call it that. So my talk ends here. I have nothing much more to say. I'm going to hand over to our hosts.
Thank you so much for such a great talk. It was really nice to see all of your research presented. So we will now move into the questions. So Rick, if you could put your final slide up, that would be really helpful. Yeah, so if anyone would like to send in any questions, remember to send these in to the questions host via the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand, let us know and we can unmute you. So we've had a few questions in already. So our first question is from, just put this in the chat for you. So our first question comes from K Sender Sarwan, and Sender asks, would the arid climate also have qualitative changes in other biological aspects, such as shifting diets contributing to a trend towards ectothermy, or at least mesothermy, or even nocturnal animals having larger eyes with highly overlapping fields of view? Also, can we say that this climate might have fueled the rise of dinosaurs?
Thank you very much for that question. And the answer effectively to each point is yes. I'll unpack that one by one. So in terms of shifts in diets, absolutely. What we obviously it's unlikely that a sudden aridification would cause a carnivore to become a herbivore, but rather we would see a change in the kind of food that a certain lineage predominantly consumes, which could set it on a different evolutionary trajectory. To give an example of that, large predators that feed on large prey would go extinct, whereas smaller ones that feed on smaller prey would not, and their traits would then be more favorable to the recovery phase. In terms of trends towards ectothermy, that's not my area of expertise. I would assume yes, but I'm not qualified to specifically untangle or answer that question. As for the nocturnal question, absolutely. You see, nocturnality is a common trait of your smaller vertebrates in any given ecosystem, and of course, early mammals and early cynodonts were likely nocturnal. And in a very arid climate, yes, there would certainly be an incentive to come out at night. And the evolution of nocturnal vision is, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that's caused by the climate directly, but it's certainly advantageous in a sort of mini ecosystem that happens at night, a sort of segment of the ecosystem that happens at night. There is an interesting paper or book article about the evolution. It's more focuses on mammals specifically, of nocturnality and how that set off a chain reaction leading to several other traits. In terms of your final question, can we say that this climate might have fueled the rise of dinosaurs? Absolutely, because niches that, like I said, the Impermian extinction event specifically, I'm going to talk about both, right? The Impermian was a reset button. Basically, life was all but wiped clean. So the ancestors of dinosaurs were now presented with a whole bunch of empty niches that texts that had gone before them had just disappeared from. And several traits that they had, one that is often posited is in early dinosaur ancestors, rapid reproduction and growth rates, which, like it was a common survival tactic anyway, though it was retained perhaps later into geological time by our dinosaur ancestors. And yeah, and also things, exactly what the temperature regulation patterns of dinosaur ancestors are is unclear, but it is posited that that might have provided that lineage with an advantage in the later Triassic. Now, initially, because we have two stages here, we have archosaurs becoming dominant over the orthorhapsids, and then we have within archosaurs your dinosaur line becoming dominant over your pseudoseuchians. So the pseudoseuchians initially radiated into those niches. However, by the end of the Triassic, they were really left with one body plan in the ancestral crocodilomorphs. They didn't seem to be as successful in holding many of those niches. Whereas it's thought that the dinosaurs might have just had an edge, such as a tendency towards larger body size to make them better from a competitive standpoint, and other forms of their anatomy that perhaps made them better suited to certain niches. Dinosaurs, both Rawasuchians and dinosaurs evolved bipedality, in my opinion, dinosaurs just did it better. Rawasuchians had rigid pillar erect columns, which column-like posture, which is highly specialized and may have allowed for faster movement. But dinosaurs were better at turning corners, which, when chasing down your prey, may prove as advantageous. There's been loads of debates and discussions over this. A lot of them aren't even published. They're just things we chat about amongst ourselves as paleontologists. But yeah, definitely, I believe it was an act of ecological opportunism. These niches were up for grabs, and dinosaurs just had the right toolkit. They were in the right place at the right time, and so their lineage radiated the way it did and was successful for as long as it was. That's my answer to that question. Hope that helps.
No, thank you so much. So we've had another question in, which asks, you mentioned the Triassic Jurassic extinction / turnover being a more gradual process. Are there any patterns you can recognize in the order of those extinctions? Which groups go first? Is that correlated to taxonomy, ecology, etc.?
Yeah, so yes, the TJ was more gradual, and the end Permian mass extinction event was quite cataclysmic. In geological time, one estimate is that it happened in as small an interval as 10,000 years, which in geological time is a second. The TJ was more, we're talking in at least the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And it was, again, it was a climatic change is the most likely example. The breakup of Pangea, associated volcanism and tectonic activity are all posited as causes. The causes of the TJ are actually among the lesser known. That's another rabbit hole to go down, but we won't do that. In terms of patterns that I can recognize, well, in both cases, in terms of specific taxonomy, they differ between the two extinctions. But in terms of the TJ, the first things that go extinct are the large things. In mass extinctions typically occur in times of ecological stress. Larger organisms need more resources to sustain themselves. They therefore go extinct. The next most vulnerable group to extinction are the most specialized forms. So these are the kind of taxa that can only eat a certain plant, are highly adapted to a certain lifestyle. In the fossil record, this is harder to gauge because a lot of those animals are smaller and live in the tropics, which don't fossilize as well. To give you a modern day example, there are several hummingbirds that can only live off a certain flower. Should that flower disappear because of climate change, that hummingbird would subsequently go extinct. In terms of taxonomy around the TJ, like I said, it's pseudotsuchians, and they actually start going extinct for the most part a good while before the TJ. The TJ is sort of the final nail in the coffin. And yeah, like your larger dinosaurs, and then in the marine extinction, that is more. I don't know the specifics of it, but that is a far more exact event. Here, rather, we're seeing larger, more specialized animals being replaced by smaller, more adaptable animals. It's not as obvious an answer as the end Permian, which is why the end Triassic extinction is so interesting, and why my lab has put in a lot of effort into studying it. Hope that helps.
Great, thank you. Just had another question. Just gonna just in the chat. So we've had another question in from K Sender Salmon, and Sender asks, I know this question is a bit of a stretch, but how did animals which were already specialized to intense arid climates adapt to the pluvial episode in the late Triassic?
Thank you for that. Um, so in a scenario like this, I honestly think this is why we saw a dying off of a lot of the more specialized pseudoscians. That this is one possible explanation. The geological events leading up to it, other than like I know there was a second acidification event, I actually am not too sure about the pluvial episode, so I don't want to give a specific answer. But it strikes me that that is why several lineages start terminating prior to the actual PJ boundary where we see the turnover. That I believe is a feasible response, but again, I'm not qualified to talk specifically about that event.
Please. So we have one final question before we will close out. This question asks, do you observe any taphonomic bias within your samples?
Absolutely. I'm very happy that question came up. So yes, the thing is with the fossil record is if you think about it, the mathematical odds of an animal dying near a body of water, alkaline soil, non-sufficient scavengers to remove all the bones, the right set of chemical reactions to fossilize the bone, that depositional environment then turning into sedimentary rock, and that subsequent sedimentary basin then being visited by a paleontologist and that fossil being recovered. So yeah, the odds of fossilizing being recovered and described are, I believe, mathematically as close to zero as you can get. In terms of specific taphonomic bias, well, we have obviously lacustrine and fluvial ecosystems. There's a bias there, and of course, in terms of our terrestrial fauna, we're seeing what was near the water. We're also not seeing things from lower latitudes, where obviously you get tropical rainforests where decomposition rates are much higher. And we're also in Southern Africa, we get different types of depositional systems. In the late Triassic, we're lucky we get mudrock, which is very low energy environment. So things that die just kind of settle and get buried. And that's where we get these large sauropodomorphs from. But if you remember earlier in my talk, I drew attention to a site called Driefontein from the early Triassic. And in the early Triassic, we get a lot of high energy ecosystems. And this will have a bias either towards like very small things. This high energy meaning like a intense flowing river or a tidal zone or something like that. So we'll get either very small things or very large things. They'll often be poorly articulated. And yes, absolutely, I do not believe it is representative of the actual ecosystem that was there. I think a lot of medium-sized things don't get preserved. I think that one site will have an overabundance of, say, small things, and another site an overabundance of large things. And like I said, once again, being near that particular body of water makes you more likely to be fossilized, as we all know in modern ecosystems. Water usage is at one particular river or pond or lake is hardly representative of the entire ecosystem. So in the fossil record in general and in our sites, yes, absolutely. But unfortunately, it's just one of those things we have to work with. There are papers that use statistical methods to reconstruct diversity curves, for example, so we can try and correct for that. But in terms of the actual specific taxa we're missing, that's a lot harder. And therefore, a lot of the findings we're talking about, such as when different lineages go extinct, need to be taken with a pinch of salt. And so when I say something like we're finding Rawasukians occurring here relatively late globally, that could be true. it could also mean that here the depositional environment was more suited to preserving them. So they could also have been occurring globally, but just not being preserved as well. So statements like that, yeah, do need to be qualified with a as best as we can tell, given the information we have kind of statement. So yeah, that would be my answer to that one.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to take back the screen share to come to the end of question time. So thank you very much again to Rick for such a fantastic talk, and thank you very much to the audience for joining us. So please remember to fill out our weekly feedback form. The link will be in the chat very shortly so that we can learn a bit more about who attended today's seminar, and join us next week for a biogeochemical ocean modeling talk with Marlon O'Dolan from GMR in Germany. And we hope to see you then. And up next, we have tea time. So this is an informal conversation about the talk in a relaxed setting. And our question of the week this week is, what is your favorite dinosaur or marine reptile? But first, it's time for a quick break before tea time. So remember to get up, walk around, have a quick drink of water, come back in 2 minutes. And if you have paleo pets, we always like to see these at tea time as well. See you in 2 minutes.
I think we'll take a stretch.